How to Read Literature Like Professor, chapters 10 and 11 by
Henry Hilbrink.
and myself, Jacob Craig.
So basically, the whole point of this chapter is to teach you never to stand next to the hero. The characters that lay closest to the main hero of a story end up dying, and it's just not a good situation all around.
Or in the example of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Jim doesn't actually die, he just gets, put in the line of danger in many different ways throughout.
I mean, he gets stuck in a ship that starts filling with water, he gets shot at, and he gets locked up by white slave owners. It's just
And then Huck's just kind of having the time of his life on his adventures.
with all of his friends, so naturally, he doesn't notice that Jim's having a bad time.
So, some characters get enveloped in the main hero's image. So, kind of like Nick Carraway and Gatsby. As the novel progresses, Nick seems to become more and more like Gatsby. With his need for money to create happiness.
But then when Gatsby dies, naturally, he realizes that he's heading down the wrong path and gets out of town as soon as he can. So this closeness is used to add depth to like two-dimensional characters such as Achilles. Achilles is more focused on just getting revenge on Agamemnon, but the death of his closest friend Patroclus really adds another dimension to his character and gives him new motivation for the rest of his story.
Grief scenes hold as much or more power than any battle within the same text. So, like Ishmael, Ishmael's livelihood is basically a grief scene, but for a more specific example, the end battle when everyone dies.
After they face Moby Dick, of course.
It proves a bigger point than the battle itself. They failed in a battle against God.
So humanity can't triumph against God. So Foster touches upon the point that it's really unfair to be friends with a hero, but then that leads into a whole argument that these characters in a book are not people that exist off the pages.
These characters are fabricated, but some have characteristics of mythological characters such as biblical characters or Greek mythology.
Or in the case of Arthurial stories, it talks about King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. So that does reference real life people, but they're more mythological in nature.
The real life possible basis from the authorial perspective shouldn't play into the understanding of the character.
This is like if the author has a really close friend that ends up acting like exactly what his character in the book acts like. You shouldn't really have to consider that in judging the character in the book's actions.
Right. In literature and film, the death of the second-hand man is commonly utilized to vicariously teach the main character lessons vital to their survival.
There's a good example in The Catcher in the Rye with Phoebe's death of her innocence. Holden's kind of just meandering around on his whole adventure, but then
Yeah, her innocence is basically metaphorically killed. He realizes that his whole journey to become an adult while holding his innocence is basically futile.
it's just all a waste of time.
Foster expands on the idea that characters do not exist as real-life humans no matter whether the author portrays their breathing, loving, eating, etc. So, he's basically just
He's just making sure that everyone understands these people are characters written into books, not someone you could pass on the street. This leads into the argument of static characters versus dynamic characters in a novel. So static characters are more two-dimensional characters. They're focused on one thing, and they're usually used as plot devices, whereas dynamic characters
they're more in depth. They're kind of the whole point of each novel. But the static characters, they tend to bring a lot of depth to dynamic characters' traits.
So, like, dynamic characters are usually the protagonist and the villain. So, then the death of static characters can improve how you see the protagonist react to it or how the villain reacts to it, truly.
And then this kind of plays on. It's a concern of length factors into the author's consideration.
So, in this case, if you really went into depth in every character, it would be a lot longer of a book than if it was just Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. That would turn into a whole book that's the size of The Grapes of Wrath. So it'd just be a waste of paper. You'd save a lot of trees doing it with static and dynamic characters, really.
Violence of inanimate objects brings personification to a whole new level. Moby Dick.
Yeah, I mean, the ocean itself is personified as death, purgatory, endlessness. It even adds a level of being able to read the text as there is no ship, there is no ocean, it's just all purgatory and eternal suffering. But
violent acts towards other people bring great esteem, good or bad, to the person acting violently. Once again, Moby Dick. Ahab almost getting shot by Starbuck kind of inhibits Ahab's.
Well, because he's violently acting insane toward his crew, so that gives him great bad esteem towards the crew, which leads to Starbuck attempting to murder him in cold blood in front of the rest of the crew.
And death remains a fantastic plot device, furthering the progression of characters' paths into darkness or light, or somewhere in between. Yes, killing someone can be very good or bad.
Like if...
So violence is abhorrent on the surface, but proves to be revealing of many things going on in literature.
So it really just tears away at the bigger picture.
Exactly. So, and violence in literature sometimes leads to sexual allusions to activities
that you really aren't supposed to speak about in society back when these novels are made.
Proctor.
Yeah, Proctor and Abigail. Do we really need to talk about that more? I mean, the whole novel is based on their sexual history, and it's all shown through acts of violence.
Acts of violence allude to anything from class resentment to sexual desire in literature, including power struggles, which outcome brings great significance to the larger meaning of the text. Once again, John Proctor and Abigail.
But also George Wilson and Gatsby again. That's a really good example that just springs to mind, because I mean George Wilson just walks about 17 miles just to kill Gatsby, just because he finds out he's basically better than him and is stealing his wife away, basically.
And Starbucks almost shooting Ahab. That kind of counts too.
Yeah, I could definitely see that in the end.
And nothing violent in a novel is an accident. Everything carries great authority.
Again, going back to Gatsby and Myrtle Wilson getting hit by a car. Although it does seem like an accident to us, it clearly has intent by good old F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Misfortune tells us that there is room to improve characters. Holden gets kicked out of school. He obviously needs to be improved.
Yeah, I mean, he's just kind of a bad person. Not literally, but he does a lot of bad things while he's trying to figure out who he is. So that kind of reflects on the things that happen to him, which a lot of these things happen to be bad, and that creates a need for him to better himself.
Like, even though his personality is good, as we see, because he's a narrator, his actions end up being pretty bad. So that's an important part of that. Diseases commonly portray loss in novels.